welcome to the Credit and Collections Technology Think Tank, I should say. My name's Colin White. I'm from Credit Connect Media. Welcome to our 9th edition of this series, where we talk virtually about the challenges that everybody faces within collections. Today we're going to hear from several high-profile collections professionals, learn about collection strategies, and hear about the role they can help produce in producing best customer outcome as we learn to live with the ramifications of the cost of living. Obviously, a lot going on at the moment. The E word, not England, the elections, interest rates, another E word, energy bills, and insurances as well rising. A lot going on, but let's talk about the positives as well, with the green shoots of hopefully the continued decline in inflation, energy bills going down, albeit being in the summer at the moment. And with that, maybe interest rates decline as well. And then obviously we've got the optimism, hopefully, of maybe a new government or not, depending on which way you're voting. I'm not committing either way on that on here. But we'll no doubt cover that. We won't be political too much today, I don't think. To give you a bit of background to today, it's we've got 2 panel sessions. It's going to be chaired by Chris Warburton, who I'll introduce shortly, but there'll be a break in between. So if you need to get an email or catch up on your emails, or have a break, have a cup of tea, catch up on your emails, and you can do that. Each session's got its own login, so you'll have to log in and log out to get to the next session. But if you miss anything, the event is recorded, so we'll probably share that within the next 24 hours or so. Any questions we don't cover off today, we're writing a review post-event, but just wanted to quickly run through what's in front of you, really. First of all, we're going to cover, this session is going to cover collections, communications, engagement. We'll have a break around 10:35, as I mentioned, and then 10:45, we'll have a second session, more speakers looking at collections risk, measuring affordability and vulnerability. But let me talk about how you guys can get engaged, because we always appreciate that. Obviously, through social media, you can use the hashtag CollectionsTechTT. It'd be really good to hear any comments on the event. But more importantly, you can engage through the platform that's in front of you here. So on the left-hand side, you've got information that's about today's session, information on how to log into the next session. We've got a little bubble where it's got a picture of a person. On there, it's got all the profiles of today's speakers, so have a look at that. Also, you can download a bit of information, look at the Credit Connect website, our news, our upcoming events, which I'll talk about at the end of session 2, and then also information on our sponsor today. So in this session, our sponsor is Financial Cloud, so we'd like to thank them for their help and support on that. And then we've got Money Hub supporting our next session as well, but both companies are supporting both sessions, so we'd really like to thank them for their support. But more importantly, we want you to get involved and ask questions. So there's a speech bubble on the left-hand side. Ask questions through that. Be really good to get you involved. As I say, anything we don't cover off, we'll write a review on the Credit Connect website next week, and we'll cover that. And then we're also over the top, and it's no concern of, and it won't affect any of our conversations today, but there's a poll going on. Really like to get your feedback on some of the things that are going on the poll as well. And again, we'll round up some of that post-event in the review next week. But anyway, enough from me. I'm going to hand over to today's chair, Chris Warburton, who's the owner of RO Strategy, and here introduce our speakers, and we'll get the conversation going. Chris, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Colin. So a little bit by way of introduction to myself. So my name's Chris Warburton. Look after RO Strategy and a website, roar.com. And basically, I spent the last sort of 20 years or so really, I suppose, in credit and collections and the collections kind of process, really sort of from an operational ownership point of view. And then the last couple of years, I've been doing a lot of sort of like exploration around some of the latest technology and working with Colin around, really what's bubbling and what's new really across the industry. So today we got a fantastic sort of couple of sessions. The first one, as Colin said, is going to be really around collections communication and engagement. And then if you stick around for the second one, we're going to talk a bit about risk monitoring, affordability, vulnerability, and some of those kind of things. And really what we want to talk about in these two sessions is what are the trends, what has changed since we all got together in the last one, and particularly since the end of last year, what's changed and what's new, and what's kind of changing for us. So so this first session, as I say, is collections, communications, engagement. We all know that we become increasingly digital. Customer expectations seem to be higher than ever. It feels like this has been changing, and I suppose we want to just try and explore some of that in terms of like best practices around communication. How do you get customers to engage with us, and really sort of help to drive support? And with me today, joining me today, we've got Simon Bayley, who's the managing director from Specialist Motor Finance, and they kind of do what it says on the tin in terms of like specialist motor finance. We've got Dan Calcott, who's the director from Digital DRA. And they're a debt resolution company. So in terms of like looking after customers in terms of like past due accounts. And then we've got Carl MacDonald, who's the founder and chief executive officer from Financial Cloud, and they're a software company, and they look around communication channels. So to the three of you, welcome. And I suppose I wanted to start off, I suppose, first, and maybe I was going to come to you, Simon, just to talk a bit about where are you seeing any kind of changes in terms of customer engagement? I mean, are you seeing like broader themes in terms of like how customers are engaging with you? I mean, is there any kind of changes you're sort of seeing underway?
Yes, yeah, most definitely. And I think I would say I'm finding it harder. I think it's probably two things. I think it's customers, and under any stress scenario, and cost of living obviously being one of those, you'll find customers are more likely to try and put their head in the sand and get through tomorrow without having the conversation. I think the piece, in addition, for how we've been doing things with the introduction of Consumer Duty, we were probably a bit over exuberant, I would say, with our call strategy. So we've reduced our frequency of calls, and that if a customer's then working on sort of trying to put the head in the sand, I think that exacerbates it a bit more. So I think it's probably on both sides that we're finding it. But from November, December, we've certainly found it a little bit harder to get hold of customers, for sure.
And Dan, what are you kind of seeing in your business?
Yeah, so I think just kind of building on what Simon said there, I think for me, the main trend that we're seeing is in terms of customer control. People want more control over how they engage with businesses and how they manage their accounts. So obviously, a digital customer journey enables a customer to access that information at a time and a place that's convenient for them. We're able to present the information to them, and then they're able to then make their informed decision. So yeah, I think definitely over the last probably 18 to 24 months, that's kind of where we're getting to.
Yeah, I mean, and Kyle, I suppose you're kind of in that comm space as well. I mean, in terms of like different techniques or how to drive engagement. I mean, are you sort of seeing, you hearing, I suppose, particularly from clients around maybe changes in the way we're wanting to interact with financial institutions?
Yeah, so our platform is a financial CRM, and a core kind of part of that is communication. How customers want to be communicated with, I don't think really over time has massively changed. Actually, over the past couple of years, I think really it's all around the balance has slightly changed, that they want to be doing more digitally. But there's certain conversations that aren't going to be replaced by that. And it's what percentage is that sensible that you can provide the best customer experience. Having a complaint via digital channel isn't maybe quite as might not be the right resolution, but there might be, for example, 80% of other cases that actually work really well through that. And what we need to figure out is when communicating with customers, what is the right tone of voice, the right wording that guides them through that journey well, especially if we're putting them down kind of a digital path. I think how you communicate with the customer and the content that you actually put out to them really kind of matters, because if it's not clear, concise, and gives them, step-by-step kind of instructions, they might just get a little bit kind of lost. So making sure kind of all customers. I think that's really kind of important just now, because there's a lot of choice out there. I think on how to manage things, and it's just simplifying that down for the customer now.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think kind of drives preferences? Do you think the customers fundamentally changing, or do you think the fact that we have all these different channels, or we have all these different methods, basically now means that then customers can then interact with us in a different way, so they have new preferences? There's a bit of a virtual kind of circle there, it kind of feels like, which is almost like we're creating the change by having more options, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Or do you think there's something more sort of like fundamentally going on in terms of, particularly, I mean, there I said that the P word, the pandemic word, particularly since then, when we sort of got, a lot of people seem to adopt sort of digital kind of processes. I mean, Simon, you took a breath. I don't know if you had a view on it.
Well, I suppose there's a couple of pieces. I think the use of digital to go through a whole conversation is there, which probably 4 or 5 years ago it sort of had bits and bobs in it. But the reality, we're looking at collections conversations. So from a customer standpoint, the option not to feel that you're being told off, it's almost that parent-child conversation. It's very hard to get out of in the first sort of 10 seconds of a call, or the reason to want to avoid making that call is there. So if you give a digital option, that saves a bit of face in that respect. But also you look at how digital the origination journeys are for probably all of the businesses that we're associated with. So we almost have zero connectivity with a customer until there's an arrears position, and then suddenly we go back to carrier pigeons and old styles of doing things, and that's probably a bit of a shock for the customers to think, okay, I did e-sign, I did online application, e-sign to get then I just got a phone call to say go and pick up your vehicle in my business, and then suddenly someone's ringing me up every other day.
And just, I mean, may I come back to you, Carl? I mean, do you think our business is starting to have that much more sort of joined up kind of journey? I mean, and what's the state of evolution, do you think, in the market around that? I mean, because these things aren't necessarily easy to put in. I mean, it does take time to sort of make progress on it.
Yeah, I think some organizations have made a lot more progress than others, especially those that specialize actually in collections. When you look at actually other organizations that maybe they don't have they're smaller, or it isn't their kind of core focus. Changing their digital portal or their app to cope with a collections journey is a huge investment. If you're set up to be a lender, building a whole collections journey into your lending journey, because they're likely to be, if they're not the same platform, if it has to be a separate platform, it's probably a separate team then. So there's a lot of investment to kind of go there, and I think that's where debt collection companies have really done well in being able to kind of expand out kind of those offerings, do more there, and really kind of focus in providing digital journeys across all the different things that our customer might be logging on to do. Because it's great if you can log on, you can see your balance, you can make a payment, fantastic. But it's more around, if you want to call up and you want to upload a document, you want to ask some information, you really want to be able to kind of expand out what you can do. Otherwise, you end up, doing, half of what you want to do digitally, and then you have to make a call anyway. So I think it's really important that, if you're going to provide a digital experience, you need to look at what actually does that customer need to fulfill their needs within that experience.
Yeah, so you're saying there's quite a bit of almost like a gap between, I suppose, the collection space, and particularly firms that operate, I mean, in that sort of like collection space, versus maybe even some of the creditors they got all this stuff up front, but it doesn't actually flow through the whole of the customer journey. So you get this sort of gap in experience to a certain extent.
It's not all the lenders, but I think some lenders have been absolutely, I've looked at, they're absolutely fantastic, but it comes down to, I suppose, the cost to do it. If you specialize in collections, you get more to kind of invest in that space. There's an ROI for you there, and what we need to do is create products that the whole of the market can adopt, that provide that kind of journey to all customers. But at the moment, it can be quite expensive still, I think, for a small to medium sized organization that doesn't specialize in that area. to get kind of a full suite of kind of products for that kind of digital journey. And I think that's really kind of where we're trying to work with customers and make it affordable for them.
And I suppose, Dan, I mean, you're sort of in that kind of space, particularly sort of from a digital point of view. I mean, how do you sort of see that in terms of like the evolution from, I suppose, from clients, and then obviously then what you can then overlay on top, and how do customers react to that as well? I think is.
Yeah, so I think Simon kind of mentioned there again in terms of the sign-up process right the way through to the onboarding process initially. The customer's already giving you indicators what their preference is, because they haven't rung you to sign up. They're not engaging with you that way to get the initial product. So that will not change when they fall behind on payments and we need to resolve their account. So that there's definitely a connection there that needs to be strengthened in terms of looking at the overall customer journey and make sure that it matches, because you can align customer preferences that way. But then on the flip side of that, when it does come through to us, obviously we'll engage with customers digitally. They can self-serve, or if they come through on one of the digital contact channels, we've had to spend a lot of time and investment and planning in how to manage those conversations effectively when they do come through on those channels. Because you've done the hard part in engaging the customer, but then if you're not able to effectively manage that conversation when they come through to you, you essentially will lose the trust at that point and disengage with the customer. And if the customer then feels the only way they're going to get the answer they want, or to be able to resolve their account the way they want, is to ring you, you're essentially forcing the customer down that.
So that's around. I mean, obviously, getting the engagement, you've got to have the follow through with the back end process,
Yes.
and have that almost like invest in that as much as actually just the contact channel.
Your team that are then responsible for managing these conversations need the tools and the training on their side to be able to do their job effectively and in a timely manner. Because whilst digital is a lot more convenient and it might not be an instant response on some of the channels, there still needs to be a relative pretty quick response in that space.
And the one thing that often comes up is around agents, I suppose. And do you always? I mean, and we seem to be quite almost like we're sort of quite almost like polarized. Like you've got to have an agent, or it's all going to be 100% digital. I mean, how do we sort of navigate that? Kind of feels like we're probably somewhere in the middle, I think. And how do we think about that, particularly from an efficiency point of view?
So sorry, do I go sound?
No, go on.
I was just going to say, in terms of how we manage that on that side, on our side, is the online customer journeys. Customers are able to self-serve the majority of the time. So the customers that are coming through on the digital chat tools usually have some sort of query regarding their account that we will need to talk to them about. So the agents will manage the conversations that way. There's a couple of benefits for those guys as well, because if you think in terms of it's quite a high pressure job, so it relieves the stress on them a little bit, because they've got the time and they've got the time to be able to read, soak in what they've got to respond to, and prepare a response, unlike on the phone. We do, however, if there are scenarios where we're unable to resolve their account digitally, we can arrange a call at that point, because there will always be someone that needs that facility.
So so that sounds like that's very sort of much a digital first kind of approach, but not exclusively. I mean, Simon, what's your kind of take on it, in terms of how best to think about it? It does seem quite polarized sometimes. Some of the debate seems quite polarized.
It does, but if you went, I think the really positive thing of this conversation, this would be completely different post-pandemic pre-pandemic to post-pandemic, because pre-pandemic, a lot of the decisions to do self-serve and digital was cost saving for the business, was the first reason for doing it, and then there may be a consumer benefit, where the talk we're doing now is how do we communicate with the customer, how the customer wants to be communicated to. But it does mean there's a bit of a clunky journey, because a lot of the original stuff put in was to solve the first problem, if I can have less agents on the phone. So trying to merge all that together is a bit that's tricky. And to Carl's position, that's the point. There's a significant amount of investment to get there. I think from our standpoint, we're nowhere near a digital only, and it's trying to move to that digital first and giving the customer options. But then I think the trick is having the right routing to where the customer is using that to minimize the impact to them rather than having the right conversation, and potentially using self-serve to allow them to pay a fraction of what they should be paying, or not having the conversation about a permanent solution or a back up to date solution. So it's the ability to move that through, and some people you just need to have a conversation with, and then potentially put them back down the digital view after that.
What about grabbing people's attention? I'm quite a big. I mean, we're talking about like outbound collections attempts. Be it from digital, be it like SMS, email, etc., as well as voice. What are the best kind of ways of sort of grabbing people's attention? I'm quite a fan of looking at marketing as an example in terms of like how do you market in terms of like try to get hold of people. I mean, are there tools and techniques around how do you get hold of them and get them to call you or get them to interact? Any kind of themes you've seen around that? I mean, Kyle, I don't know if you've kind of thought around that. And there's this whole field around attention economics as well, which is like it's saying we just have less time than we've ever had before. How do you grab them to then say, look, this is important and we can offer you some support?
Yeah, so I think the key thing really comes down to how much do you know about that customer. If the customers they've got a preference in a certain channel, I think obviously you kind of have to go down that channel initially because you're going to get higher engagement. I think a big area where we get a huge focus is personalization, and that's both in the engagement side. So if you're going to send some information out, make sure that it's relevant to that customer, and it's not just about using the customer's name, and it could be at any point in the journey. So a good one to me is like if someone goes ahead and they raise a query to you, just respond to that customer and feed back what their query was back to them in an email, so they understand that you captured it right. To maybe put it up on the portal as well, so they can track it through. So it's not another inbound call that comes back. I think following through kind of information when I'm talking about personalization, I'm not just talking about putting someone's name in, or it's the operational information that you gather from the customer at each point of the journey. So whether that's at the very beginning, you're populating in their product information, their personal information that you have to give them kind of a full picture of exactly who you are, why you're contacting them, and to give them as much information. But then as they start to engage with you, it's ensuring that you actually use that information that you're gathering on your system back into your communication, so that they feel involved. It's a conversation. It's not just a very transactional piece. I think that's often kind of where collections has kind of gone to. It's here's 2 dozen, 3 dozen templates that we send out that say please contact us, when it shouldn't be. It should be a bit more kind of conversational, and that depends whether you're that's not just on chatbots, but that's on if you're using like email, even if you're using like letter or SMS, all of them, they should all have this kind of personalization kind of built into them that I think engages the customer an awful lot more.
Yeah, I mean, Dan, what's your kind of view in terms of like what works and what kind of channels works, what kind of approaches kind of work to get customers to kind of engage?
So I think the most personalization Kyle's mentioned there, but I think for me, what we've seen, and I believe that the most important things here are the language and the branding that you're using when you communicate with these customers, especially when it comes to debt resolution. So I talk a lot about how debt collection to the average person has a negative connotation associated with it. So that's one of the drivers behind us dropping the word collection and and it's about, for us, we're about stripping back the message we were trying to get across to the customer. We're a lot friendly. It's a lot in terms of the color scheme and the language you're using. It's a lot friendlier, a lot more approachable, and we've stripped the message right back in terms of we're not just here to collect from you. We're here to help you resolve your account. We have a lot more tools to be able to help you outside of just payments. So in our realm, the hardest and the initial hump that we've got to get over is engaging with the customer. We need them to react to something we send. So that's always the hardest part. And then it's about how do we communicate that message to the customer throughout the contact strategy.
And I suppose when you look at like collections messages, I mean, we're not just in an environment of collections messages. You're in an environment of every other email, marketing email that comes through, sales emails, and how much do we have to keep up with that and sort of like look at that as almost like being our competition for the customer's attention versus it just being what we want to do.
Yeah, and that's it essentially. So my background is primarily marketing. So that's kind of what we've brought to the table. It's more of a customer service marketing approach within debt collection, just to promote that positive inbound engagement. And yeah, like I say, if your email is in and amongst all of the other fancy sales, look at me emails, yours needs to stand out. And how do you do that? You can play around with your color schemes within there, the templates that you're using. We've got GIFs in ours, we've got emojis, and it is almost that marketing approach to this part of the customer journey.
So, Simon, how do you guys kind of think about that in terms of like that kind of competition and you know, in terms of like even like using some of the marketing techniques in terms of driving engagement?
Yeah, I'm going to steal a couple of things from Dan from that last conversation. So I think it makes a lot of sense looking that way. The tricky piece is you want to connect to them, to have a conversation to how we can help them, but it's very hard to get them to connect on that. And of course, some people will happily connect at the early stage because they're really conscious of don't want to be in a debt situation, and the others, as we talked about earlier, will put their head in the sand. We obviously with cars have the ability to repossess, so you have notice of defaults and stuff like that, and so the biggest response we'll get is when we get to that notice of the default position. But you've also broken that relationship, so you might be able to get them back on track, but you know there's probably never going to be a trust thing there because you've used the biggest stick you've got in your arsenal. And the bit that I still need to get us better at, or we need to get better at, is that we want to contact you to see how we can help you. First of all, let's have that conversation and getting people to read that in our communications to make them want to contact us, rather than think, oh, it's too soft, so I don't need to worry about it because someone else is sending me a harder one, or I'll wait till the next stage.
How much work do you think, particularly on the creditor side, do you think we can do in terms of like doing that joined up journey that Kyle talked about around sort of like building that relationship before they're in collection to then help you when they are in collections? Because again, that's another dynamic we often see, which is when we're in collections, it's kind of like we get it when they're a pound past due, and that's when our journey starts. But actually, some of this stuff, particularly with pre-arrears, kind of starts earlier, and they'll talk to you if you've given the support messages when they weren't in trouble.
It does, and one of the things we've done to try and do that, and I've done this in a couple of companies, is let's just communicate to the customers on almost nothing. So key part is not trying to sell them anything. So for us, we can tell them that their MOT's due in a month's time. We can tell them, you know, winter things, how to look after your car in winter and stuff like. So we just, it's not really to do anything more than to remind them that we're here, and to not be trying to do anything. We're not trying to sell them, and we're not trying to collect anything. We're just trying to inform them. So when we do, then hopefully, or if we do need to have a conversation or send them a letter on arrears or a phone call, they don't see us as the sort of big bad wolf or whatever you want to call it. So that's part of the strategy that we try and do in there.
And what about in terms of like hyper personalization? I mean, I'm going to use the AI word now, which is sort of like keeps coming up. I mean, how much of a role do you think that's going to play in terms of, particularly in terms of like a greater degree of personalization? So it's not just the name and the account details; it then reflects back all of that information you've kind of gathered. I mean, Carl, you're sort of starting to allude to that degree of sort of like hyper personalization. Do you think with that's going to evolve as a result of some of the, particularly the large language model stuff?
Yeah, so to be honest, I think it's already kind of there before even AI. To touch base back on one of the points that that Simon, obviously yourself and actually Daniel, you both talking about is, I think it's about when to strike a conversation. I think that's one thing that really needs to be thought. So something we do, for example, is and it works really well in marketing. Like I get loads of sales calls through, and see if someone like calls me through and I'm in the middle of something, I just have to put the phone down because I'm on a call, I'm dealing with something. But see if they contact me when I'm on the website or I've just been on it. It's a whole different game. I'll have a conversation at that point. And I think being able to understand, for us, for example, we've got an event-based system so that we can tell when someone clicks an email, if they go onto the portal, what they're looking at on the portal, what they're on. Understanding when a customer is engaged, if you can then engage the customer at that point, you're going to have a much better conversation with them. And that's personalization as well. So personalization shouldn't just be about content. It's about, how do you personalize when to contact a customer? When do you decide, what to send through, what channel to go through, all of this, what recommendation you put forward to them, is using their information to make the experience personal to them. And I think that is probably one of the most important parts that a lot of places struggle with, is that I go in and they have a dialing list they do on a daily basis. They've got like a workflow that goes out and they send like a load of emails. But I think sometimes how you communicate with the customer has to be a bit more kind of like an onion. You kind of get your core kind of strategy, but then you've got on top of that, you've got more behavioral based stuff. So if a customer's engaging at a certain point, engage back with them then, because that's the kind of key part to me. And I just think that, like, how I operate, like I have a totally different experience with people that call me depending when they call me. And I think in collections, when people are working 9 to 5, when do you know when they're on a break or if they're on their lunch that you want to do it? You need to take those kind of touch points, and your platform can tell you that kind of stuff, so that you can get in contact then.
So that was quite a powerful example in terms of like that you're reacting to an individual's event that's happened. So I use a personal example here. So I was looking at concert tickets as an example, and that was great. So you all look at it and you look on the map and you say, like, oh, there's no tickets left, whatever it is, and then they'll email you back, the next day to say, do you still want those tickets because you didn't buy them? And and that has a higher engagement rate because it was the right time against an action. I mean. Dan, how do you sort of think about that in terms of like your kind of model? Because that feels like that sort of like that personalization is not just around the account or even the behavior that's happened before, but it's around events as well, like trigger events.
Yeah, definitely. So I agree with Kyle on that. And yeah, we've spent a lot of time building out those trigger events as well. Kyle mentioned there in terms of when they're interacting online, is there a certain drop off? Do they drop off at a certain point? We will then try re-engage them based on that previous action. So yeah. One of the
questions just come through, and I'm going to put it to you, Dan, and then I will come to you, Simon. Around, do you think outbound calling campaigns are a thing of the past? So I'm going to be provocative and come to you, Dan, first, and then Simon.
I don't even know what outbound calling campaigns are, Chris. So yeah, they're a thing of the past, definitely for me. And yeah, it's not something that
Simon, what's your view?
I think they're going that way. I think telephony for a long time will definitely be a route that has to stay, but it will move very inbound related to. Our success rate on outbound, if you look at it over 3 or 4 year periods, only going in one direction.
And the other things mentioned in the comments was really around. So does that mean that the calls we do have though end up becoming much longer, more complex, resulting in complaints, vulnerable, those kind of things? So it's does it represent a cost save, or is there I suppose a volume save that generates because the actual calls become longer?
I mean, the calls are absolutely. We're probably about 60-70% higher on our calls, but that's post consumer duty, and significant increase in forbearance options and more detailed INEs and pieces like that. But it's a real the customer journey on a call is only getting worse because of that. I&E completion manually 25-30 minutes. No customer phones up expecting to spend that much time on the call. There may be a break at work or just sneaking out, or they've lost their whole lunch hour or half hour, whatever it is, speaking to us, which none of that can be a good customer journey. And the digital routes are significantly more advanced in those, whether using open banking or not, but they can do it in their own sort of time. So calls are a lot longer. They're probably a lot more frustrating. And it's not our fault, but there's a lot more for us to go through, and there's a lot more options for customers.
And I suppose technology is a potential solution for that. I mean, these things take time to kind of put in a sort of accept that. I mean, how much do you think? I mean, and it comes back to, I suppose, omni-channel as well, right? Which is how important do you think that is in terms of maybe starting off with, with a voice call, but then being able to pass off onto, an affordability check online, and then be able. I mean, how flexible do you think that needs to be? I mean, Kyle, you're sort of like nodding there in terms of like the role of technology to be able to do that, but then how do you integrate that into some of these journeys that are already potentially even on the phone? Kyle, what do you think?
So I think a lot of that, to be honest, I think it's trying to figure out, I suppose, what the customer's trying to do. If there's going to be a long, like the example there where you said about INEs, a customer probably isn't going to have all the depth of information actually to hand. No. So often what I think is it's sending out like a link to the customer. So ping an SMS up to them with a link that takes them to your portal, where you have an IE for them to fill in. You can track progress on it, and when they complete it, either it takes them on to the next stage digitally, or you re-engage with them if you haven't seen them taking that next stage. And I would outbound calling at that point, but I think outbound calling blank across the board, I think, is massively gone down. Tailored campaigns based upon what the customer has done and when you need to engage with them. I think that's where the new is. And the best thing there is that you should have much higher contact rates, and it's blending that kind of journey together. I don't actually see in the future as having customer conversations or digital journeys. I think it's going to be a hybrid of the both, and it may well take longer across the two, but that's how you solve the more complex cases. And it takes an awful lot, because everyone's been kind of developing out digital only journeys. I don't think it will be a digital journey. Would be great for those like skimming off the easy cases. Those more complex cases will actually require kind of a hybrid, and ensuring that you have systems in place that can actually cope with that back and forth and that hybrid approach, I think, is going to be really important.
Do you think omni-channel is maybe the wrong word, and hybrid is really what we should be talking about? It's like how do you move seamlessly from one particular channel to something else, and then back to the digital channel, as an example?
I think a lot of problems there is that people have implemented several technology solutions for different things, which then doesn't collate the data into one place. Really, what you want to have is your underlying customer data sitting, so you get a 360 view of that customer. If someone does something in the portal, it goes back into your core system. If they do something on an IVR, it goes into the core system. SMS, it all needs to be consolidated together so that you can have that hybrid approach. It really doesn't work well without it. And I think people have often they've maybe had a system in place, and they've gone ahead and they've bolted on a portal, or they've bolted on an IVR. The challenge that they're going to have is trying to, how do we bring that information together into one place that we can do all of that together? And I see there being kind of a look again, I suppose, at kind of at people's kind of solutions to make that happen.
Yeah, I mean, and Dan, I was going to come to you around sort of the role of process design in that. I mean, so to a certain extent, if you've designed a digital end-to-end kind of process that does everything, overlaying the human interaction on that is relatively straightforward. But if you've got the process design, where it's more complex, if you've got a manual-based solution, you need to overlay digital, I would think.
Yeah. So I approach these conversations, I'm coming from the side of anything that you can do on the phone, we can either build a digital customer journey or do on a digital contact channel. So that is obviously when we were building and designing everything that we have, that was how we were approaching these scenarios. So we would either build an online customer journey or build the tools, because again, it comes back to implementing digital channels is easy. You can find a web chat provider, a WhatsApp provider, that's the easy part. But it's then managing those conversations when they do come through to speak to you, because we have a payment plan flow, for example, but we still have customers coming through and talking to us on digital channels about arranging payment plans. So rather than at that point, we don't just want to say, oh, log in and set up your payment plan online. We've built the tools for the agents on our side to be able to manage that conversation just like they would on the phone, and again, personalized to the customer based on the conversation we've had on a digital contact channel, and send a personalized link to confirm the payment plan at that point. So yeah, to me, it all comes down to the planning and implementation of how you're getting these digital contact channels into your customer journey, and how you're getting these web portals into your customer journey, because the hybrid word is definitely applicable, because we still have people that we can't serve digitally for whatever reason, but the vast majority we're able to do that. So yeah, it's about getting it right and having the tools to be able to manage it effectively.
It's kind of like the mix is changing, and probably the mix will continue to change. Even just what you were saying, Simon, in terms of like, you know, the move away from outbound telephony, sort of like the mix is changing, and it's gradually changing, maybe different by different players in the market, or those are at different stages of evolution, really. I mean, Simon, you've come from, I've got a wider kind of process. I mean, the complexity around process design and change probably doesn't go away. I mean, how do you sort of think about that in terms of navigating from what you have to where you necessarily want to get to?
For us, it's quite hard, because ours is clunky. We've got a portal, we've got sort of email, we've got a two-way SMS, but none of it's, and then we've obviously got the telephony, and none of it's linked to Kyle's point. That's the important piece to get to. So we're having to do a whole project to work on, do we update, do we replace, to get to that. The piece that I suppose I never go away from it, probably throughout my career, is speaking to people, is the nuance, and you don't want to lose that nuance. And in our world, it's a secured debt. How important is that to you, rather than it's easy to go down, that you have a payment of this, you haven't made a payment, how are you going to get through that? But the conversation needs to start about, actually, if you're financially struggling, is this a need, or is a way that exit is actually best for you, because you don't, the car was a nice to have rather than a need. And if it's the other way around, so it's understanding the nuance to be able to say, okay, well, let's look at what tools we've got to be able to support that, rather than just getting through the next month.
Is that's also a bit of a data and information kind of question, which is, if you have something that's just a very straightforward, you're just clicking boxes or moving boxes through a process, then you actually don't have a lot of information. You actually talk with someone, or you interact with someone through two-way SMS or through two-way chat. You're actually giving out a lot of information. I think about the calls that are involved. I mean, is it around sort of like gathering extra information when you need to gather information? Do we need to think about it almost like with a data kind of lens on it?
Yeah, and sometimes it's the customers not thought about it themselves. And again, with as is a product-based financial product option, so it's natural to think, oh no, I need this, I've got this, and you have a conversation. You actually realise, well, I walk to work, and I don't have to drive my kids around at the weekend, but it's useful for when I need it. But why are you paying £400 for that? You can hire a car at the time for that. So it's getting them to work out what's right for them. They won't necessarily have thought about it, because all they're thinking of, oh, someone's contacting me because I've got a debt, how am I going to solve that? Rather than what's the real issue is whether it's needed. If it's needed, then we can work around that. If it's not, well, let's have that. And I'm not sure how easy that is to get if you're just looking at a digital journey.
Yeah. And so do you think, so do we miss some of the kind of that information? I mean, Kyle, how do you think about that in terms of like the information you do get on a call, or the information you do get with those kind of interactions? Is there any way of kind of putting that into some of the personalization journeys that you talked about?
Yeah, I think this ties directly back to where AI is really going to be useful. If digital's great because you can gather like how they're interacting, when they're interacting, and it'll deal with like I don't know, 50, 60% of cases today. There will be those kind of nuanced cases which are more complex that I think they do need a conversation. You just want to go ahead and have a frank conversation with the customer to understand their situation, figure out why are they, are they going through a divorce, engaging from the customer, is it a short, medium, kind of long-term piece, really having a proper conversation with someone so you kind of understand their situation. I don't think that's going to disappear from like some customers. And I think, to be honest, some customers want that. They want to be kind of like understood. And what you want, I suppose, is to be gathering that information in your system so that, because unless you're an organization that each one of your agents has got like a pool of customers that specifically dealing with, it needs to be captured well so that the next agent that speaks to them, they're not having to re-explain their situation again. If you're having that deep conversation with someone, at least take the effort and put it down so that the next person comes on to like, look, okay, I know where you've been. You've already spoke about it. What's really useful then is once you have all of this information, this is where AI will start to be a lot more useful. And it's not about making conversations. It's about taking that customer's information and looking at it and maybe getting better recommendations. I think I was looking at a stat, and I think Amazon, their recommendation engine produces something like 60 or 70% of their revenue. And it's just understanding the customer better. And I think that is really kind of where this industry has to go. We need to understand the customer better, because if we understand the customer, we can achieve better outcomes, which is better for everyone. It's better for us, it's better for them. So I think that's really kind of what we want to do, and a lot of that kind of comes down to ensuring you're capturing these kind of conversations from a telephony. And this last bit from on telephony, people should really be converting their calls to text, and once that's been run kind of through, and you've got kind of you've taken the calls, convert them to text, you can start to understand and run it through AIs for like sentiment analysis. So we can say, well, how did the customer? Because some people, I think, are more emotionally intelligent than others. Some people will sit in a call, they'll speak to a customer, and they'll be like, oh, I know how that customer felt. Some people just aren't quite as emotional. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think AI could actually help out there. Just be like, look, it sounded as though that person was actually a little bit, maybe emotionally distressed that you didn't pick up on. So, and I think it's almost helping out people in areas maybe that it's not like their bread and butter.
How much, just a quick question on that, reflection on that, is how much do you think we should be capturing some of that data now, even if the techniques aren't there, in terms of like losing the information, right? So typically, if a call's not recorded, at least, and it's not recorded at all, other than the notes that are put on the account, the information's gone, right? So do you think we should be sort of getting to almost like have a bit of almost like a data collection kind of mindset now, that in the future, in 2 years' time or whenever it is, and the technology kind of catches up in terms of like security and those kind of things, it will be useful? I mean, do you think we should be thinking about that?
Yeah, so it's a massive, it's one of the core pieces of work we've done kind of in our software, is ensuring that the database is completely dynamic, that it follows your processes. So, if you're building out a process, you don't want to type it down just in a note. Ideally, what you want to do is you want to try make it structured so that it's easier to digest and analyze. And I think having stuff like that available and bringing it all together, so you do have this kind of 360 kind of view of the customer, will become incredibly kind of important, because eventually that's who you're going to help the customer the most. There's a lot of individual conversations I think that people have, and unless literally you're speaking to the 3 other people in your organization that also spoke to that customer, your one source is going to be the platform that you're working off of. You need to make sure that that you can understand what conversations have been had through that.
Yeah, and sort of join it all together. I mean, Dan, I was going to come to you just for a quick comment around. Obviously, we talked about voice and voice transcription there, but I mean, are there? Do you think there are digital ways of gathering that kind of same kind of subtle information? I mean, how do you sort of think about that? I mean, in one case you've got almost like tick boxes, which doesn't have a lot. Yeah. But then you've also got other kind of channels like chat, etc. That, I mean, how do you sort of think about that richness of information?
So I think obviously that my point here is Digital doesn't mean that you lose the human. So you're still able to have these conversations and capture this information. It's just on a digital channel. And Kyle, you've brought up customer sentiment there and transferring the call transcript into text. We have that already. So we are sentiment scoring these messages in real time as they come through. And currently all it's doing is prompting the guys to kind of let them know and give them the heads up prior to responding the current sentiment of the customer. So I think that the important piece there is digital does not mean losing the human. We're still having these conversations with these customers. We're still getting into the detail about the circumstances, and just like you would on the phone. So yeah, I think that's the point I'd like to make there. And then obviously at the back of that, we are capturing all this data. We're less likely to lose details of specific conversations because we have the chat log. And then yes, we'll start building the models in the background to be tracking and analysing this data.
So what you're saying there is it's not one or the other; it's the change in mix and just making sure you got the right mix for it.
And that comes down to preference and how you implement it again.
Yeah. And there's one question that came through here around open banking. I mean, Simon, you were just talking about affordability as an example around. I mean, you sort of have you looked at open banking, or what's your kind of view on open banking? And I mean, both from an account information services point of view, but also from payments as well. I mean, what's your kind of perspective on that?
We've really struggled to get customers to buy into open banking on the back end. We've had more success on new business side. So customers looking to pass affordability to borrow on the back end, the take up is very minimal. So we've not really had the success that we were hoping to get from it. So we've been moving more towards a standardized approach of things like using a portal or SMSing out. I'm not a big fan of SMSing out because our position is that customers don't come back to us, and we sort of had them on the phone, we've lost them, and then we can't get hold of them again. And that's the scenario that we're finding. But it needs to we need to get more out of open banking. But there does seem to be a lack of comfort at the moment with customers in arrears position.
Okay. And Kyle, I mean, what have you seen, I suppose, particularly in things like payments as well? So payments seems to be more popular than some of the account information stuff. I don't know if you sort of have a perspective on that. And we're waiting for non-sweeping VRPs to come through as an example, which is that's the nirvana that everyone's kind of waiting for, really, isn't it? But
yeah, I think open banking just now is still in its infancy. I don't think it's great for businesses. Really, it's a cost save. If you're doing a really big transaction, it costs you an awful lot less to do it through. I think when VRP comes in, that'll be the game changer. And until that happens, I think it'll be an uphill battle. I do think the data piece, there's some legs in that. I think it's difficult for a customer to. There's no incentive for a customer in financial difficulty to share their detailed financial information. There's some bits and pieces we're working on kind of in the background there that makes it a little bit more appealing, which we'll kind of release later this year. But I think just now it's difficult. If you ask for a line item, transactional information, I don't think I would give it to an organization. So I don't understand how I'd expect a customer that sits on my platform to do it. So really, when we kind of look at solutions, I kind of put my head in it. I'm like, would I use it? And it's just sensible bits like that. Like it's I don't use open banking payments unless it's for my business. I don't use it for me. So ensuring that the journeys are designed in a way that you'd use them yourself, I think. And it's that age-old thing. It's like, would your mother, would your gran use it? Put yourself in other people's feet and other people's position. I think is really important when kind of designing these kind of journeys or products. and we've got a bit of a journey to kind of go on there to make them kind of appealing to consumers.
It sounds like that's going back to the process design piece. So rather than having a technology and then looking for a use for it, it's really around like how do you design a process, and then if the technology fits in with that, then that's kind of the good thing. That's a better way of thinking about it. I mean, Dan, looking pensive. I mean, what's your kind of view on that?
Yeah, so I think Kyle's hit nail on head in terms of the incentive when it comes down to affordability. Just because of where we sit in the customer journey, that is a hard conversion. On the payments front, though, the customer journey is brilliant. So if you get that right from a customer perspective, making payment via open banking is quick, easy. And so, yeah, we have quite a good uptake on payments via open banking, not so much on the affordability side. And that comes down to incentive, but there's also consumer understanding of open banking and how we're using that data and what we're using it for. So as we see that grow, naturally we'll see it be used a little bit more. Probably in the initial sign-up phase rather than debt resolution, but again, we'll get there.
So I see that the Colin's kind of appeared, but before we sort of finish, I want to sort of go around and just, we've heard a lot, I suppose, in this kind of session really around things like using kind of like almost like real-time events or triggers, trying to get people to engage, thinking about the kind of content and communication to try and get people engaged, and sort of like using that personalization kind of approach. We've heard a lot about, the new kind of techniques that are sort of like being looked at. I mean, where do you think we'll be if we have this conversation in like 3 years' time? Where do you think we'll be? I mean, what's your view around what the conversation will be about? I mean, Dan, I'll go to you. I'll just go around the group. I mean, I know you're just talking, but where do you think we'll be if we're having this conversation in 3 years' time?
It's a tough one because things are moving quickly. There's a lot of new tech coming into play. The language models are getting a lot smarter. We have his eye on them. I'm still skeptical of the day-to-day use and implementation of them. But yeah, it's a tough question because things are moving quickly.
What's your view, Simon? Or what's your desires of where you want to be in 3 years' time? Maybe that's a better way of putting it.
I think it goes back to one of Carl's points earlier. I think we'll have connected conversations that can use multiple channels and flip between one and the other. So it may be we're doing a digital channel, but actually the right thing is to move that to a voice and then go straight back to a digital channel of whatever form. But by having that effective, my guess is your interaction with the customers will be significantly better because you're connecting to them, not hoping they're going to pick up an email or pick up a phone, because people don't use phones for calls anymore anyway. So I think the taker will be right because you speak to them in the manner they want to be spoken to. They're more likely to want to speak back to you, whether that's all, in whatever medium you're using.
Yeah, so that's sort of like that hybrid kind of approach. And Kyle, what's your kind of vision for the future in terms of like where we'll be in 3 years' time? Maybe 5 years is too far out given how fast it's moving, like Dan's saying. But
yeah, I think there's a huge drive to make use of AI just now. And I think there's a huge opportunity there that I don't think any organization is going to be able to ignore in 3 years. I think the challenge that people are going to come up with is people have bolted on solutions. So they've had like a platform, they've bolted on an IVR, they've bolted on a portal. And the problem there is you have silos. What I probably see is people are going to review their infrastructure and they're going to understand that silos don't work, especially for this kind of new age. And they're going to start looking at, effectively what we're doing, which is a financial CRM, a CRM system that literally consolidates that kind of customer information together is going to be like, I think, the key thing over the next couple of years, so that you can utilize all of the customer information from one place, and then use that to feed kind of like AIs and automate more. And I think that's really kind of the next stage that I kind of see in the industry, that people will go on that journey.
Sort of like joining that data together and putting it all together. Yeah. Okay, well, fantastic. Well, so Dan, Simon, and Kyle, thanks very much for joining us. Great insights, really, across the across the board there. Really interesting to like some new techniques, I think, as well, in terms of like how to get a hold of people and how to engage people. So really appreciate you making the time for us today. And Colin, I'll pass back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chris, and thanks everybody who's tuned in, and thanks for the questions that came in, and yeah, really interesting conversation as ever to hear about different customer engagement strategies, and interested about the call center piece as well. Yeah, really great. So yeah, I just want to wrap up this session and obviously thank Dan, Kyle, and Simon for their input. Really great. And of course, thank Financial Cloud for their sponsorship of the session. Without them, it wouldn't take place. So really appreciate that. We're going to have a slight break now. So 10:30, as we reach 10:30, 10:45, we've got another session coming up. So 10-15 minutes time, talking about collections risk, measuring affordability and vulnerability. So that'll be a different kind of conversation to this. And obviously, we've got some great speakers lined up. Just to flag up as well for everybody out there, we've got other events taking place across this year. So some in the commercial space, we've got a number of different awards events as well that we're going to be announcing and showcasing. And we've got a face-to-face version of this collections technology think tank in November, a long time away. Things will have changed in the world by then, so there's always a lot to talk about. So have a look on our Credit Connect website on the event section. And we'd love to see people in person there, including some of these speakers, hopefully, as well. So just want to thank everybody, and we'll see everybody soon in either the next session or a future event. Thanks, everybody, for your time. Cheers. Bye-bye.
That's all right.
Thank you. Bye.